There are a couple of key things that I think differentiate like really long-term great investors and short-term not great investors. And one of them is just asking the very simple question, but what if it works?
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Build in Public podcast. I'm your host, KP, and on this show, I interview world class entrepreneurs, ambitious startup founders, creators, and builders on the internet who are boldly building the future in public. This podcast is my excuse to take you all on a curious journey to understand, learn, and hopefully be inspired by the worldviews, insights, and stories of these fabulous people changing the world. So far, I've gotten the rare privilege to sit down with incredible guests like Gary Vee, Alexis Ohanian, Kat Cole, Sahil Levingia, and many more leaders. So check out the full podcast listing at buildingpublicpodcast.com. Now buckle up and get ready for our latest episode. In today's episode, you will meet Adam Draper. Adam is the founder and managing director of Boost VC, which is an early stage venture capital firm with over $200 million in assets under management. Boost VC's tagline is the first check in sci-fi, which means they invest $500K in pre-seed startups, accelerating the sci-fi future. Think sectors like aerospace, VR, AR, energy, climate, AI, ML, deep tech, and more. Their portfolio includes huge companies like Coinbase, Etherscan, and Amplitude. Adam is a 2X entrepreneur and a fourth generation venture capitalist who comes from a family of highly influential leaders, including his dad, Tim Draper, who made investments in Skype, Tesla, Bitcoin, and more. On this episode, we went into the backstory of how we both met on Twitter many years ago, Adam's belief in the power of building in public, how he met the iconic Stan Lee for lunch, and how he wants to pay it forward now. Unlike in any other episode, we also had a fun brainstorming session about the future of tech and tossed a few moonshot ideas around. Some ideas may sound crazy, but you'll see that we're both dreamers. I had a ton of fun on this interview and hope you'll find value in it too. With that said, I bring you Adam. Enjoy. Welcome to the Build in Public podcast, Adam. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, KP. This is great.
So, for the listeners and the folks who are watching this, we went into a little bit of backstory, which I want to recreate because I think it speaks to a lot about Silicon Valley's paid forward culture, but specifically the way I first interfaced you, I think 5 years ago, as I said earlier, which I don't even know if you remember that, like 5 years ago in a random casual Twitter interaction. So the short story is, somebody posted that name one person you'd love to meet in your life and that would make, would be an amazing, opportunity or whatever. Or who would you love to have lunch with or whatever. It's one of those Twitter open prompts. And I responded, and this is at the time I had like 400 followers. I was a nobody knew me, like I didn't have a podcast or anything. I responded saying, Naval Ravikant, right? And Adam saw that thread and DM'd me unprompted and offered to simply make that intro, which blew my mind. Adam being Adam, and I Googled him, and I was like, who's this guy who wants to help me? And he's like, actually, legit. This is 5 years ago. This is when you were already an investor. I think you were already running Boost 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, 11 years ago. So yeah.
Yeah,
So,
dude. So you were like, "What is this?" And you made that intro, and you checked in with Naval, and eventually, of course, Naval being Naval, he was like, "Sorry, but no, I can't meet with every person on the, on Twitter. It's gonna, But that's him. I was not fully expecting him to like jump at it, but I was so graciously touched by your act and your willingness to just come out and help Adam. So thank you so much. And here we are 5 years later on the podcast.
So
That was awesome.
you can hold me to eventually getting in front of Naval over later, and you
Thank you.
should. So the reason, and I don't think the reason that I did that is there are a couple, but one is like something that we sort of talked about is like paying it forward is very, very important to the job. Finding
Yeah.
opportunities to be able to help people is very important to being a venture capitalist and an investor and identifying where that could be. But one of the reasons is recently around that time, I met an investor, and I was pitching them. Her name was Holly Cow on my fund, and
Right.
sh and she was on the foundation of Stan Lee Foundation, which is I love comic books, and so I said, Stan Lee's one of two people I ever want to meet in the world.
Yeah.
There are two people, and one's Stan Lee, and she said, "Well, you better hurry up. He's 94." And I was like, "You're right. I should. Can you make that happen?" And she did. And it was the most amazing thing where I genuinely had a list of two people and the universe provided. And I was like, if there's one person that someone wants to meet, that that's amazing that like if you just ask for it sometimes. She wasn't the first person I ever told about this. So she was the first person who could make it happen. And she followed through and I had this amazing lunch with Stan Lee. It was a 2 hour lunch and I invited my
Wow.
dad. And we sat around and I asked him every geeky comic book question. He's the creator of all the Marvel superheroes everyone knows.
Right.
And so I realized the power of paying it forward was like, and asking for it. I had a debt to the universe where I have to pay it forward. I, uh, so that's sort of a fun thing where it's like, it does happen. Like, I mean, if you know what you want, I always say like, the universe generally provides if you know what you want and you ask for what you want. Uh,
Correct.
the issue is that I think a lot of people don't know what they want. And so I think that once you figure it out, though, if you just ask everyone for it, people like helping. I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
another thing that might be
Yeah.
counterintuitive. People want to help. They want to be
Yeah.
useful. I want to be useful. So
Yeah.
that's how it
Thank you.
works.
And I'm so glad you sort of opened with that anecdote, because by the way, I didn't know the backstory, but it makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me of, sort of we were riffing about building in public before going on the air as well, where I saw the taste of this. Um, by the way, I kept thinking what you did for me was a fluke, Adam, for a long time. I was like, what? This is maybe Adam just being extra generous. This is, and then after a while, fast forward 3-4 years into this sort of Twitter game and building in public, being open game, I started my podcast in 2021, January. I had, again, quite serendipitously, I posted in one of the threads, I just pitched Alex Lieberman, CEO at the time of Morning Brew. He was talking nonstop about building in public that whole day. And I thought, wait, this guy's obsessed about this. I'm obsessed about this. Would it make sense for us to be on a pod? And by the way, I've never done a podcast in my whole life before that, right? He has done hundreds by then because he's the CEO of Morning Brew. I just shot my shot, and he said instantaneously yes, which shocked me. I was like, whoa. And that but happened in a way that didn't happen in public. It happened in DMs, like how you and I our interaction happened in DMs. But I finally mustered up a little bit courage that May. And one Sunday morning, I thought, what if I just asked Gary Vee? Because I love Gary Vee. And I'm an immigrant from India for about, I don't know, 6-7 years. I watched his content, coming from the bottom to the top kind of thing. And I thought, I think he's the kind of person who will resonate with this, build in public or document, don't create this philosophy. And so I just shot my shot. And within 28 minutes, he said yes in public. I put it on Twitter. I pitched him on Twitter. I made it easy for him to say no with an opening statement that said 100% ready if you say no. Like, don't make it don't obligate them kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he showed up a month later on the podcast. Literally changed my life. And I got to work with him 6 months down the line. Right? So it's weird how like you said, sometimes we don't know what we exactly want. And second thing, when we know what we want, we would probably share that with a spouse, maybe with your best friend, but you would never put it on the public forum.
But
But there's
again,
something magical about that.
to this building in public, like I think there's that unquantifiable piece of building in public where you're really telling people in the world what you want, right? Like
Yeah.
you're sort of just saying very clearly, this is how things are going. This is what we need right now. These are the things that are going poorly, and then it
Right.
gives people the opportunity to be useful. And
Yeah.
like that's exciting. It reduces the cost of labor in a lot of ways, right? Like it
Right.
reduces the cost of ideas, solutions, like all that stuff. So first off, I love that I was some small part of this amazing podcast, and I am a huge promoter of building in public generally because I think
I've seen you do that. I've seen you, especially the way you handle your Twitter. I mean, I think we all have ebbs and flows. We all have moments. I mean, periods where we're like, we put out a lot of content, and then we like sometimes we go back to recharge. I've seen you. I've been following you for a while, and I've seen you kind of be very open and bold. And going back to one other thing, Adam, which you touched on briefly, I feel like there's literally no downside as long as you're not use common sense and build in public. I guess is the point.
yeah.
It's like don't like completely, disclose, strategic advantages that you may need, or like names of your customers and all those things, which I think is common sense 101 shit, doesn't need to be even mentioned. But apart from that,
I also
literally,
think like even those things.
I mean,
I think 90% of the time people won't, like, if people are planning to imitate you, they won't know the why you're doing what you're doing.
yes,
And so it eventually sort of fails on this copycat scheme. I'm not going to say that never happens, but if you're the one genuinely coming up with your own ideas, like, share it. This is something my family is really notoriously good at, and I will say that it is not me. Like
what is it?
Coached by a very amazing. I've been lucky to be related to a bunch of venture capitalists. No, my dad just notoriously is like, ideas are free, right? Like, talk about it. Go.
Yes.
Like, see how the world believes about it. Like, don't.
Yes.
And I have yet to see a stealth company pull it off. So, like, which is the opposite. That's the opposing force to the idea of building in public, right? Like the opposing force. It's build in public, some sliding scale of building in public, and then I'm stealth, not talking to anyone because we're super secretive and awesome.
Right.
And even Boost VC, we lead pre-seed rounds of deep tech, and one of the categories we've gone pretty hard after was aerospace.
Oh.
Even our aerospace companies build in public. Like, yes, there's intellectual property. Yes, there's government relationships. Yes, there's all these things. But, like, have you ever seen a rocket video? It's pretty awesome. And, like, they realized how awesome it is. And so, like, our nuclear fission company, Radiant, Doug Bernauer, he gave a presentation to our group of Boost VC, and all of our portfolio companies, and he was like, I think you're doing a disservice to your company if you are not building in public. And he's building a nuclear reactor. Like, it's not like there's a lot of probably like novel things there that he won't want out in the world. And he's still saying, we've seen nuclear not work for 50 years because everyone's keeping it behind closed doors. We're just going to make all the mistakes. We're going to do it. Like, we'll show you. Check it out.
Yes. And I think that's, oddly enough, it reminds me of all the SpaceX launches, including the ones that failed. I mean, 100%. I think people don't appreciate the level of impact watching a giant rocket land itself back on the ground from space. Imagine how many future astronauts and architects and like engineers and mechanical engineers and like all sorts of people were inspired. How many kids were inspired by that video of a rocket launching, and like coming back to the ground and like landing itself perfectly okay?
I mean, during COVID, that one launch where they launched astronauts into space, like the four astronauts.
Right.
Like, that was something that the entire American people were able to connect over. Like, I think people undervalue that, like, okay, yes, there are trolls on the internet, right? Like, there are people who are going to say, no, that it's impossible, it won't work. And sometimes they're right. Like, sometimes they're right about certain concepts of it. But if you have enough endurance, you get to prove them wrong, so they get to be your fuel. But people undervalue, like, the moment where everyone gets to share in the success of human endeavor. And That's something that I talk that, like, if I were to summarize what Boost VC really is all about, it's like I want to be supportive of and invest in the peak of human endeavor. And endeavor, I believe, unites everyone. I think that that's
Yes.
why I continue to do what I'm doing, is like I want humans to feel a shared moment of when we break barriers of whatever kind.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
everyone goes, it's impossible, it's impossible, it's impossible until it's not, until it did it, and then you're like, okay,
Yes.
I can't say it's impossible anymore. So what do I call it? Like done, boring, like it's a and then the next thing, like the normalization
I
of space is insane to me.
insane.
Like
I couldn't agree more.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, growing up, like we were imagining and wondering exactly these kind of things. Like, would we go to Mars? Right? Would we do even more planetary travel? And now they're like, it's just another YouTube video. Like,
Literally, like, it's just another YouTube
what?
video. What? Take a
Find
second to
someone.
really soak it in.
I dare you to find someone who doesn't believe Elon will be able to get SpaceX to Mars now. Like
Yeah.
at the beginning, that was insane. That concept, like
Yeah.
that was an insanity.
Right.
But now we're getting 200 launches a year or whatever, and like
Yeah.
I'm not going to be the person doubting Elon on this. Like I think
Right.
he's probably like, and we say Elon, and Elon really represents like thousands of people who are incredibly talented operating for like this crucible of incredible technical talent, right? Like
Right.
and I mean, yeah, it's pretty remarkable. So
So
I think
you've
like that
invested.
is fascinating.
now I was gonna ask you, you've invested in a bunch of founders and startups whose sole focus was to break through some kind of a limiting belief or a barrier that was initially believed to be impossible. So you're probably the right person to ask this question. What do you think differentiates these founders from, let's say, a bunch of random assortment of a bunch of YC founders, a bunch of Onyx founders, whatever. Like you just take a random collection of founders versus the ones who you see as the top 1% who are so driven to make the impossible possible. Like what are some unique traits that you think they possess?
A lot of people say like everyone has a book in them. I truly believe that everyone has a good company in them. Like I believe, I don't think it's like, and don't get me wrong, it like there's differences across the board. No great founder looks like another great founder. Like they don't think the same. They don't operate the same. And over enough, I don't believe that it's about linear time based experience. I think it's about the reason that obsessing over something increases your likelihood that you're going to outperform is that you're getting reps in order to create epiphanies for yourself. So like
Yes.
like no one's one idea stayed the same, exactly the same. It wasn't
Yeah.
like they were right. Like they didn't start the company and they were right. You have to have a good combination of like a learning mind where you're flexible and a like momentum. We call it default to movement, like a momentum driven like company. Like you need to be willing to say yes and do things. So saying all that, what I would say the two I'm gonna write down one more three things that I think end up happening. There's only one thing that's driven every single massive success I've had. Okay, so for as far as investments are concerned, the first one is the only one is commitment, and it's commitment to either the mission. So for Elon, it's going to Mars, or for Brian Armstrong, it was one financial infrastructure for the planet, or for
Right.
basically like there's this mission that's driving the decisions that everyone's making. The other commitment is commitment to your team and your partnership and of that team. Like I backed Amplitude, and Curtis Liu and Spencer Skates, they could have been working on literally anything. They would have succeeded at some point over time. And like they picked something they were like asymmetrically great at. Another company called Wave Mobile Money. They went through 4 different ideas and then ended up on this other one, on remittance, which turned into mobile money in Africa and absolutely annihilated it. So generally my answer ends up being sort of this. That is the thing. It's commitment to the project. It's commitment to this idea of you. So you think about what you need in order to make that work. You need enough self-confidence. You need to know where you're right and where you're wrong. And then you need to be able to inspire people around you to go on this mission. So the reason mission-driven founders probably are the largest successes at the end of the day, like when it works, it's like massive, is because the cost of attracting talent is reduced so much. So what I mean is, building in public is a good example, but what I mean is, if I'm building a space company, it's fulfilling prophecy that all these space very talented, amazing space obsessors I don't need to sell them on the mission.
Right.
There's no mission sale. It's just like, hey, we're going to be throwing stuff into space. Like, it's so easy, right, to sell someone on that. Hey, we're going to electrify the world. Hey, we're going to change the way that money works. Hey, we're going to, being able to reduce the cost of capturing that talent is really what this is. Because, sorry, these are the things I think about a lot. Because a company, all it is an organism to attract all the most brilliant people to work on your problem, right? Like, that's what a company is. A company is it's just a vehicle in which you have a concept, you want to build a product, and you want to solve a problem. And you just attract all the best people that you can into that orb. And that's what it is. So the common things, it's really the one thing. I talked about a lot of things, but really it's the one thing. It's commitment. So I've not seen anything else. Like, it's definitely not intelligence. And I'm not saying that as a negative. Like, you probably have some level of intelligence. But is it intelligent to run your head into a wall every day, 5 times a day for like 20 years? I don't know. Like, that's basically what founding a startup is. It's eating glass every day for 20 years. And there's some combination of commitment and having a iron gut. Like always trying to improve yourself, but your gut is just like, you are able to just
stomach the punches.
You hold all the punches. You let the rest of the team solve everything, and you hold all the stress, right? Like, you get to be like, the buck stops here. All the decisions you take some responsibility for. You're the founders. They have an iron gut. So commitment, iron gut. Got there.
Love it. So as you were talking about these traits, and as you were kind of, talking about the mission-driven companies and how powerful having a strong, compelling mission is, it reminded me of this thing that I've been thinking about lately, that ambition, is one of those things that school can't teach you, your family can't teach you. It's only other founders or other ambitious people can pass on to you. So it's kind of like it's an infectious thing that you can only soak in when you are around other people, or somebody believes in you and like they raise the floor, raise the ceiling of your ambition. It's something I found myself, Adam, because I went from low income family in India to to being a grad student in America, and at every step of my journey, I feel like somebody believed in me and saw a bigger floor, a bigger ceiling for me, like ambition-wise, and I latched onto that and then tried to like grow into, that the next thing, and then kept going on and on. And first of all, would you agree with that framework, ambition being a thing that you learn from watching other people around you and be inspired by that? And number two, if that's a yes, number two is, who raised your ceiling of ambition in your life?
It's a great question. So I don't know if my answer would have been different even weeks ago or months ago. I think it would still be the same. Like, I love the idea of the ambition being sort of this infectious disease where you surround yourself with people who. So I look at it slightly differently, though. I don't look at it as someone's believing in me to raise my ceiling. It's I see someone else who has it, and I realize I can raise my ceiling. So it's like rather than thinking like where it's like someone is sort of saying like you could go bigger. It's I can go bigger. It's like
You're
the
reflecting.
realization.
You're reflecting for yourself that I could go bigger when you look at someone taking a bigger
Because
shot.
I see something in myself where I'm like, hey, it's okay to go bigger, right? So I'll answer this two different ways. One is, look, I was raised by my dad and my mom, obviously, and my dad is go bigger person. Like nothing is going bigger. Like so, it's just a big aura of bigness, and like so there's all it is like, hey, if you have a conversation with my dad, who's in my opinion the greatest seed stage inventor ever, it's all about how much bigger you can go. So the whole conversation is not what you're doing, it's if this succeeds, this is how big your idea is. And if he sees no limit, like he'll probably invest because it's just that's what like he wants to be in that world where it's like a limitless above. The other way is like recently I think this is one of the greatest things about running a program so we run a program twice a year. All the companies we invested in the last 6 months, we invest $500K into pre-seed deals. But all the deals that we do every 6 months goes through our go-to-market program. We find that go-to-market is the thing that deep tech companies need more than almost anything else. Like they have the technical talent, they need go-to-market strategy.
Correct.
And so we run this program. But the coolest thing about running a program and bringing in speakers in person is I get to talk to them all. And it's the same thing with the podcast or whatever. Like, and you start to realize like some of them you're like, okay, like I understand their ambition or whatever. And sometimes you meet someone and you're like, this is the next level, right? Like,
right.
Like I'm sort of like settling in for a marathon. This person is like turning up the heat, and they've been doing it longer than me and pushing harder than me. And you're like, okay, I can, and then all of a sudden you try to rise to the challenge. You can't look at it like I can't do that, right? Like you look at it that way, all of a sudden you're settling and you just stay running. You settle and you go, wait a second, someone was able to do this. I can figure this out. And you start doing more reps, and you start working harder, and it's not. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people think working harder is like doing more emails or like whatever, like beep bop bop bop. But like working harder is like obsessing over the strategic decisions. I find my job is more and more making important decisions, right? Like it's like and making sure that I have all of the information around me to be able to make the best of those decisions. I get paid to make decisions, and so like you do all the work, you write all the blog posts, you talk to all the people, and you do all those things literally just for you to make 3 decisions a year, right? Like, and like that's a fascinating thing. Like I make a lot of investment decisions a year, but like most of that's driven by like 3 harder, more strategic for Boost VC decisions a year. And so like that's what I think about. I think about like how much am I doing in order to get those things out there? And that's the crucible of starting a startup, right? Like that's the trials. That's I also should take a step back and be like, I founded Boost VC. I founded a company before. I think of myself as a founder. Okay? But when I meet founders, I sometimes think, Well, maybe I'm not a founder. Maybe I'm just an investor because this person's an assassin. This is like I'm looking at John Wick in like part 4, and they just unveiled like how much of an assassin they are, right?
Right.
So that's the
It's in Jay-Z's terms, right? Like all of life is really about rising up to the highest elevation of the self, right? And I think um, this is like, by the way, reference to one of his recent songs called "God Did," which I highly recommend you check out because it's mind blowing. I feel like a startup founder,
what's it called?
could have written, right? It's called "God Did," and Jay Z has a guest appearance on that one, and his verse comes third. Mind blowing. Like it felt like a startup founder wrote that verse, because there were so many sort of the hero's journey story, sort of
I see no
arcs in that.
difference. I see no difference between a founder and Jay Z, right? Like Jay
Yeah,
Z is a founder. Jay Z,
yeah,
Eminem, Dr.
turning, yeah,
Dre,
yes,
I see no. They
Y-
tell those stories at the beginning
yes,
where they're trying to
yes.
get people to believe, and it's the exact. It's the
It's the exact same
creator
thing.
aspect of it. The product's a little different.
Yes, what's funny though? What I thought was interesting is because growing up in India, like hip hop was not big, right? I mean, even in the '90s, where I grew up in, it was like not big. I mean, it was like I guess pop was more big, So I didn't really listen too much of Jay Z or any of these guys. When I moved to America in 2011, I started listening to this stuff, and this was like peak Jay Z has passed. I think 2008 or 9 was peak Jay Z or something. But I was listening to some of the stuff in 2011, 12, 13, and at that time Jay Z was 41, and he was talking about his mission and his journey from the Marcy projects to like where he was now, and he was a all the journey and the highs and lows. And then the other song, which is I'm talking about, called "God Did," that came in last year, and he's 51, and he's still singing the same thing. And I'm like, dude, this guy has been singing the same sort of mission for 30 years, right? And like, it's crazy how consistent and prolific and like applied to the mission you have to be, about telling telling a story, for it to resonate.
They always
You know,
say CEOs don't realize how your job just becomes repeating the exact same thing over and over and
over
over.
and over again, right? And
Yeah.
so I was blown away by that. I was like, wow, it's sometimes. So my sister and I, we talk about this, and I feel like we both are at the inflection point of our careers, and I always remind her, like, you got to be patient. You got to play the 30-year game, for us to be relevant in the industries. You can't just like come in 2 years and like, I'm a young buck, take a shot on me. You got to play the long ass game. So switching back, you talked about being sort of thinking big, Adam. Which, by the way, I think in all of your attempts, in all your investments, in the way you sort of carry yourself, I feel like that to me has been very apparent and consistent that you're the kind of person who loves to think big or challenge themselves to think big. But I want to ask this sort of backstory question. When was the time maybe you were part of your dad's decision making engine, or you saw him operate, and or make some decisions, etc., and you really like thought, okay, this is unbelievable. Like this is like the biggest thing. My dad's already crazy. He already is a big thinker, but this is nuts. What was that for you?
So first off, I don't know if I've ever been a part of his decision making.
Okay.
But I will here. This is what I'll say. Misunderstood. I think my dad's one of the most misunderstood people in venture capital. Like when people read the articles about him or whatever. Like I think his whole thing is like he's incredibly brilliant. Like people reflect on the decisions of investments he's made, but his general strategic thinking is better than almost anyone. I mean, I'll say like he is his biggest swings that he has personally taken that people don't really realize he took because
Right.
people have like they you know he tried to break California into 3 states. He tried to break California into 6 states and then three. So talk about disruptive big ideas, right? Like he went for it.
Right.
He tried to bring school charters to California in 1999, Prop 38, and he lost to the unions. He was on the State Board of Education, so he went for education. Like that was everything to him, was making sure that the education of California stayed at the top, and he lost a lot. He kept losing. And but he kept learning these really valuable lessons. So my answer is like, I don't know, breaking California 6 parts and seeing a road to how to do that was pretty insane. Like,
Yeah.
I wasn't on that level when he was doing that. I wasn't like, I mean, I loved and knew he was doing it, and I actually loved the idea. Like, I'm all about competitive governance. I think I think we're gonna head in that direction anyway. The craziest thing about all this, the thing that is misleading about my dad, I think more than anything else, is he's always effing right. But he is wrong. He might be wrong on time frame of people realizing it's the right move. And like that distance is where, you miss things. And like and so I would say that's probably, I could have answered that very quickly just by saying break California to 6 states. But I want to say, like, that wasn't his only thing that he's attempted in that space. Like, he's attempted multiple things. He was thrown off the school board of education in California, and because he had too many not new ideas, basically. Like, they just wanted to like keep doing the same thing.
Back to one other thing you touched on, self-sovereignty. What does that mean, and what's a big idea in that realm?
So I believe what technology is leading us towards is like sovereign alternatives to what the government provides. So good example of this is banking. So crypto is exactly finance, but it doesn't look the same, but it gives you a choice. It gives you a choice. Do I want to opt in to government-run funded systems? Or do I want to opt out and own my own money? And that's the decision. It's not easier, by the way. I don't believe crypto's easier. I don't believe but I do believe having that choice will lead to a competitive space that makes better services for everyone. So
it's different. It may not be easier. Yeah.
Different. Think about healthcare. So in self-sovereignty, like healthcare, there's the classic hospital system, and I'm not sure if you've been to the hospital recently, but it's all about liability and not about helping the customer or the patient.
Yeah.
So there's all these services that have started that are alternatives. So you can think about yoga. Yoga is helping people, right? Like, it's helping people in the same way that a doctor used to.
Right.
It's helping people in the same way, like get fit, it's like the proactive direct to consumer stuff. So there's a ton of services where you're starting to be in control of your data, your blood, yourself. And like, that's a big sovereign.
I see you. I think there's a bunch of studios that are coming out, right? Like the health studios.
Yeah.
And they're like, you'll pay a SaaS membership, almost like a monthly membership to them, and then you get your blood work done there. And you're treated more like a D2C customer, unlike the healthcare, which has layers and layers and layers.
Get peer-to-peer. Get to peer-to-peer is sort of the thesis, but it allows you to have the choice of whether or not you want someone else completely dictating all of the things, which I think in a lot of ways is going to be better in certain capacities.
Yeah.
Like, I think there are going to be a lot of ways that's important, but knowing that there's a choice will lead you to make the choice, right? Like, knowing there's an alternative. So health, education is a good example. So I believe that we're in this transition phase of choice. And if you invest towards the alternatives, you'll perform very well.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. The thing about earlier, when you shared something about sovereignty, made me think about this other idea that I've been sitting on for a while. And I thought maybe that's interesting, which is, I believe in the future. I believe that, I don't know if this will happen, but I wish it happens, where every person on planet Earth has an LLC, like has some version of a company. I don't know. I just feel like the 300 years old industrial job, like machine, I feel like is archaic. Today you are a one-person media company. I'm a one-person media company. I have the podcast. You could do the same thing. I'm a one-person media company. I have a newsletter. You have the same thing. So everybody can have the sort of full stack of a company where you have marketing and you have sales, which is through trust, which is podcasting. And then you have some kind of a service that you can offer to the free market. And
where the customers, I mean, they're global, right? My fellowship, just like how you guys run the Boost VC thing, your customers are not all in Bay Area, right? There are a bunch of people all around, I bet.
Yeah.
So all my customers of Building Public Fellowship are from 8 countries and many, many cities. So I don't even have to be step in those countries to get them as customers, which tells me there's something here in the next 40 years if you project it out.
So
You know?
whoever solves for the universal LLC is going to
Yeah.
do pretty well, probably, or some
Right?
interface of that.
Because think about that. Because you know Deal, right? Deal.com,
Yeah,
DEL.
it's getting
You're
close.
solving for universal HR, which, by the way, I use that for my Building Public LLC, which I'm so grateful for that they took all the headaches of tax compliance across so many countries that I don't care for, right? So wondering that's the HR layer solved for. What would be the universal LLC service, And it's also partly you got to ignite that interest in other people to start an LLC. Otherwise, they're not gonna, right? They're just happy with their own steady jobs. So I feel like you have to kindle that a little bit in them.
Yeah, it's the unbundling and
Yeah.
rebundling, right? Like
Yeah.
we're in the state of unbundling the company, the
Yeah.
LLC a little bit, where it's
Yeah.
like you have enough technology that you can sort of not have to deal with back office and
Yeah.
not have you can and you'll start to have your own intellectual property that partners with other people, so you start to borrow revenue from other people. So
Yes.
that, like,
You could do
everything-
affiliations, right? So I think you could do like help each other out. Like if I send 4 leads to an agency because I ran the no-code program, for example, if I send 4 leads to the agencies that were doing no-code agencies, that's like revenue share, for example, right? So I think,
100%.
I don't know. I was just thinking about that. I have never really thought
I
deep
love
into
that.
it.
That's a 100x idea.
Yeah.
That's a big a universal companies. I mean, in crypto, people have attempted a couple different varieties.
Right.
So here, this is we'll get to the problem of extremes is no one. You've already gone through the process of making the leaps and the epiphanies you've had to be able to get there,
Right.
right? The most expensive thing about extreme solutions is the education to get
Yes,
people up to
100%.
speed.
And that's why I said you gotta make them desire this, because that's the hard part. And they're like,
that's why Deal is such a good example, right? Like Deal is taking HR, but like it's solving a problem. You just want to pay people. And
Yeah.
there happen to be a lot of people all over the world, and you're like, I don't want to deal with the logistics of like formulating how they get paid. I just want to click a button and say they get paid. So for this case, someone has to create sort of the not to brainstorm ideas, but I hope someone does this, is like really what we're talking about is the text there and the legal regulations there for becoming an LLC all the way up the stack. What's not there is the translation of every country to one standard, right? Like
yes,
not caring that you're in Switzerland and figuring out the way in which you interact with a, US based LLC.
right.
No, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we're almost coming to the end of our segment here. So I got one last question. Tell us about what's super exciting right now at Boost, and give a bat signal to the kind of founders you want to attract.
What's exciting about Boost? We just finished our program, so like relevant topically, like today. We just ended our in-person week, which gives me and my team like an insane amount of energy. Gives a ton of like it's so exciting to be able to see everyone and like vibe on everyone's energy, and you realize how talented all the people you've invested in are, and like that's really exciting. And so like topically, what's really been the energy feeder for me in the last like week was that where we had great speakers, we had great mentors, we had a bunch of events, and then we also just got to like have mutual experiences. I think the thing that Zoom doesn't have is that you have random mutual experiences with people
Right.
that drive friendship. And so friendship is really what we're gunning for. Trust is what we're gunning for. The bad signal for founders, my job is to try to find people who are trying to accomplish I said it earlier, but I try to spend all my time figuring out where people are trying to solve the hardest problems with the latest technology. And what that description is the peak of human endeavor. And so what we specialize really hard in is like trying to translate those very deep technologies to different markets. And we spend a lot of time with the founders figuring that out. And that's sort of what we enjoy. And that's what we love is like, you have a very, very difficult, you believe it's for a specific problem. You are able to build all the technology. What we do is we try to translate what a business is. We are the difference between tinkerer and entrepreneur. And like, sorry, tinkerer is not the right way to think of it, but like inventor and entrepreneur.
Right.
And we want to be able to own that problem and translate that problem to the world. And I think we've done it for a long time. And sometimes we're too early. Sometimes, we try to back just good people solving hard problems.
I love that. I love the focus on sort of expanding the human endeavor, right? The number of times you mentioned that phrase, human endeavor, has been super, refreshing to hear.
Human endeavor is, I believe, so dive deep into the evil workings of my brain, but like look, if you think about, everyone always tries to compare the differences between like value investing, like Warren Buffett,
Right.
and venture investing, like it's some sort of
Risk.
like trading thing, like a
Right.
gamble. And I believe that they're all the same, and it's really about figuring out what people in the market undervalue or overvalue. And human endeavor is the one thing that humans themselves are very bad at about estimating the impact of. And if that's true, and you're actually selecting the right problems and big ideas, then those companies are always undervalued, in which case it is a good investment. And that's my job. My job at the end of the day is to invest and find and make impact. And so that's my thesis. My thesis is human endeavor is the one thing that's always undervalued because people can't fathom what scale is.
Right. It's very hard to fathom that. Yeah. Adam, well, it was a pleasure having you here. I cannot believe how quickly time passed, which is usually a great indication of a fantastic chat.
We brainstormed insane ideas for like 30 minutes. So I don't
Isn't
know
that crazy?
If figure a bad idea.
I mean, look, I think, I think we put some skin in the game, right? It's like back to what we were talking about. Like it's genuinely building in public.
To this and they're like, actually, I could do that property ownership of the ocean thing. Like, call me, right?
Yeah.
And
I think
LLCs, LLCs everywhere, like call us, right? Like,
yes, agreed. And I think, to be honest though, I feel like a lot of the times, even the podcasts or even just like the threads or whatever, I feel like people are trying to regurgitate Wikipedia articles and shit that's already happened. Like, because this takes a little bit of boldness to kind of look a little bit foolish on air and think a little, stretch your brain, because it's hard, right? And both of us have.
I love the idea that the new age of podcasting is brainstorming.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like everyone, if I see another creator who's, I don't know, creators talk about how much money they're making a lot now,
right?
Like when you watch all these things, and I don't think that I'm like, great, that's fantastic, like great, but like that's not helping me make better decisions, right? Like that's not
exactly. I think the other thing too is like we in the sea of information, Adam, I feel like we're losing the sight of wonder. And right now, there's so many podcasts, so many tweets, so many whatever. They're all about information, overloading you. But I think like you can't spend your whole life just consuming tons and tons of information. I think what was brilliant about your dad, and I'm really soaking it in. I'm genuinely soaking it. I wish one day I get a chance to meet him, because at every turn, like no matter how silly or big or crazy or disruptive the ideas sounded, he just followed his wonder. Which is something I'm leaning into as I'm getting older. Like I'm 34, 35 now. I'm like, fuck what people think. I just want to lean into what feels wondrous to me.
My grandpa's my grandpa's 95, and if anyone,
Yeah.
he'll ask people their age, and he'd say, "Oh, to be 34."
Right?
Yeah,
So,
no,
but
I get it. No, leaning into the wonder. The best look. I think that one of the things that differentiates, like, there are a couple of key things that I think differentiate, like, really long-term great investors and short-term not great investors. And one of them is just asking the very simple question, but what if it works?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that's it. Like, what if it
yeah.
works? And I think my dad's the king of asking that question. Like, I think he's the best at it. And it's, everyone gets hampered down because everyone's trying to measure everything. They're all trying to
Right.
do like metrics, drive
Driven. Yeah.
answers and stuff. And I believe that we've oversaturated on certainty around data, and it's coming back the other. It's going to come back the other way, where it's just like, I like the person and it's a big idea, right? Like, there's wisdom in like those being the edges. And data's good. Everyone wants as much data as possible, but when you use it as the only driver of decisions,
Right.
you're actually not using your brain.
Right. So this is true. When I ask some of the smart people that I interview on the podcast, or like when I got to talk to them for coffee, at first I just throw in a bunch of like normal questions about, hey, what do you think is the trends of this industry, whatever. And then they usually tell me what's on Wall Street Journal, what they read like yesterday night. It's all the stuff. Then I say, let's go crazy. What's something that you wish existed doesn't exist? And then they start becoming the inner child that we all have. And then they toss out the stuff that they're afraid to say because it may look dumb or foolish or whatever. But it blows my mind that that's what they're obsessed about. So if you ever want to start a company, you want to start a company on something that sounds so dumb to your wife or to your spouse or to your best friend, but you're obsessed about it. It's something about it that's gnawing
It's
at you.
Yeah, and 100%. I think this is so good. And it needs to be familiar but insane.
Yes. Yes. That's it. That's the sound clip. That's the sound clip for this episode. Literally, because this, by the way, this broke so many rules about my podcast. Like this is a very completely off tangent way of interview. The way you've done it, the way you've answered, everything was completely insane. So I want to say thank you once again. And if you're ever in Atlanta, please let me know because I would love to grab coffee with you or lunch with you.
Atlanta. Okay, that's good to know.
Yes. And vice versa. If I'm ever in Bay Area, I would love to drop
If you're
by
there,
and see
look me
you.
up. I'm here most of the time. I'm doing a East Coast trip. It's almost solidified, but I might be able to add a stop if
Please
this one
do.
other thing doesn't work. And then,
Please do. I'll even throw in.
and
If
if
we
not,
can even probably
if
plan it.
not,
Even
my goal
yeah.
would be early next year. I need to do a
Okay.
trip sort of in that area. So,
Yeah. And I could probably even throw in a meetup or an event where we can sort of bat signal some ambitious founders in Atlanta. And I can
love it.
have you as a
I mean,
speaker.
Calendly's in Atlanta.
Yeah, Canada's in Atlanta. But there's so many. I feel like there's so many that are I feel like in the fringes a little bit in the city because the mainstream focus in the conversation is about B2B fintech or B2B SaaS. I feel like the crazies need a little bit of a celebration. Like you need to kind of draw them in a little bit. But the way you do that is by saying it's okay, think big, think mega big.
If you have any ideas for me on how to do that, not specifically going to Atlanta, but like how to draw in the inner crazy wonder as you're
Yeah.
talking about it and throw up a bad signal, because I mean that's, if there's an equation for it, I would like to know what that equation
But
is.
think about like what is the catnip for the crazy person? The
It's
catnip is that's what. By the way, I'm crazy myself, right? I think growing up in India in that poverty, I'm like, I don't think I would be half the year, right? But when I hear about your dad, hear about what he's like, the California story, like how the f did one person intend to break up a state into 6 pieces? Now I'm thinking. I had a call the other day with one of my friends. He said KP should run for mayor. Nobody ever said that, and I said, what the f? And he's like, because you have this service thing, you want to help people, like why don't you run? I'm like, so when this is catnip, by the way, right? Like why can't we, what if it exists? That's literally it. If we talk about this over and over again, instead of here's the breakdown of how Webflow made money. Like, who cares? It's over. Webflow store is out, right? Like, it's not about making money.
Or
It's
how
about
are
like
they gonna
drawing
make?
these people in.
I would rather know how they're going to make the next 10 bill, right? Like
Right. But
brainstorm
still, it's not, again,
with the founder of Webflow. I would love to be able to talk through
yeah,
what that strategy
that
looks like and
too.
what
I'm sure.
stresses them
I'm sure
out.
even he would appreciate it because he's constantly probably fielded by all these growth stage investors who are hounding him about going to IPO and what's the dollar figure and all that bullshit. But this is what I'm talking about. I think a lot of us, and that's why, like, even for you, like a lot of this podcasting, what I'm trying to do is like, we have to normalize ambitious behavior, ambitious thinking, and of course it comes with a healthy dose of failure, right? So you have to also normalize that. But I thought what these guys with the Varda team, right, the LK99, that was really ambitious. I thought that was cool. But we just gotta, put this out there. So, Adam, it was a pleasure. I know I don't want to overstay my welcome, but thanks, and let's keep in touch.